It began with the smallest shift, almost invisible, a flicker of something new passing between us as I opened the front door. I remember the way the porch light carved the evening into pale and shadow, how the air smelled faintly of rain and cut grass, how my heart tapped out a different rhythm just for a second. She stood there, suitcase in hand, smiling with a quiet ease that seemed entirely her own. There was a confidence in her posture, a lightness in the way she glanced around the hallway, taking in the photographs on the wall, the scattered shoes by the door, the warm light spilling from the kitchen. I offered her a place for her things and watched as she moved through my house, already turning it into something unfamiliar. She radiated a calm curiosity, running her fingers over the banister, brushing loose hair behind her ear, setting her bag down with the kind of deliberation that made everything else seem hurried by comparison. I busied myself in the kitchen, slicing fruit, scooping popcorn into bowls, arranging snacks on the low table, trying not to look as if I was watching her. Still, I felt the pull of her presence in every room, a faint current in the air that made it impossible to fully relax. There was something magnetic in the way she laughed at some comment from the hallway, the way she settled onto the couch, legs curled beneath her, flipping through streaming options with absent-minded fingers. I caught myself observing her reflection in the glass, the curve of her neck, the easy slope of her shoulder as she leaned back, a small frown of concentration on her brow as she considered what to watch. My own reflection, by contrast, looked tight, unsure, almost transparent beside her. Every movement between us felt loaded, meaningful in its ordinariness. When I passed her a glass of wine, our hands brushed for a second, just long enough for a silent jolt to travel up my arm and settle in my chest. I was hyper-aware of my own skin, the soft fabric of my sweater, the warmth in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the wine. She seemed to inhabit the space so effortlessly, as though she belonged here, as though there were no history to contend with, no silent rules or boundaries, just the steady flow of the present moment. We chose a film, or rather, pretended to. The title hovered on the screen, remote lying between us, both of us stretched out under a single blanket. I felt the weight of her body beside mine, the subtle press of her thigh through the layers, the mingling of our breaths in the close air. The night outside thickened, and the house became a cocoon, safe, muted, full of invisible threads pulling us closer. I was painfully aware of every detail, the flickering light from the TV, the gentle brush of her arm when she reached for the popcorn, the curve of her lips around the rim of her glass. I was a woman split in two, one part keeping up the easy hospitality of a host, the other spiraling inward, caught in the slow, inevitable gravity of her presence. Somewhere in the quiet, I realized I was no longer waiting for the movie to start. My pulse moved to a different tempo, quiet and urgent. I wanted to remember every detail of that evening, every glance and gesture, because I could sense, even then, that something irreversible had begun. There was an intimacy blooming in the silence between us, a slow unveiling, a barely there invitation written in the hush of the room and the electricity of our first accidental touch. It was a beginning I had never planned for, but already I knew I would carry it with me, tucked away beneath my skin, long after the credits rolled. Time seemed to take on a different texture as the evening unfolded around us, the minutes stretching out in languid, almost dreamlike succession. I could feel anticipation weaving through the air, a quiet, steady current threading its way between every movement and every glance. The glow from the lamp on the side table painted her skin with soft gold, turning ordinary moments into something charged and secret. I poured wine, listening to the gentle clink of glass, the easy murmur of her voice as she spoke about her journey, the stray details of her day. I nodded, answered where I was supposed to, but all the while my mind hovered elsewhere, caught up in the nearness of her, the way her laughter settled low in her chest, the warmth that seemed to radiate from her side of the couch and slip beneath the blanket to mingle with mine. We had chosen a film, the opening credits waiting on the screen, but the play button remained untouched. Neither of us seemed in any rush to begin. I sat with my knees drawn up, my body angled almost unconsciously in her direction, and I could feel the soft press of her leg against mine, the edges of her hair brushing my shoulder when she leaned closer to reach for a snack. The small, everyday rituals, pouring more wine, adjusting the pillows, tucking the blanket around us, became heightened, each touch lingering a moment longer than necessary, each glance holding a question that neither of us put into words. My senses felt sharpened, every sound amplified, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant bark of a dog outside, the rhythm of her breathing in the hush between sentences. The room seemed to shrink, or perhaps it was only my world narrowing down to her presence beside me, the unmistakable magnetism of possibility humming in the half-lit space. My thoughts drifted, carrying me back to moments earlier in the day when I had carefully chosen what to wear, the way I'd fixed my hair, as if I had known without knowing that tonight would be different. Every part of me was alive with a subtle tension, the kind that hovers in the air just before the first summer storm. I watched her fingertips as she toyed absently with the edge of her sleeve, traced the line of her jaw as she laughed softly at something on her phone, admired the easy grace with which she belonged wherever she was. There was a gentle boldness to her, a way of looking at me that made it impossible to pretend we were simply two friends watching a movie. The night lingered, a slow bloom unfolding petal by petal, refusing to be hurried. I let myself savor the uncertainty, the delicious ache of waiting, the awareness that everything was teetering on the edge of change. It felt both exhilarating and terrifying to be so present in my own skin, so awake to every nuance of this moment. The rest of the world fell away until all that remained was the hush between heartbeats, the softness of her arm pressed against mine, and the shared breath we drew beneath the weight of a blanket that now felt like the only barrier between us and something that could not be undone. The moment unraveled itself gently, almost imperceptibly, yet with a force that was undeniable. At first, there was only the awareness of closeness, the heat of her body a living presence beside mine beneath the blanket. My fingers fidgeted with the edge of the fabric, my thoughts growing more tangled with every shared glance, every lingering touch as we passed snacks or shifted our positions on the couch. There was a sudden awareness of my own body, how my breathing grew shallow, how my pulse quickened each time her knee pressed lightly against mine, how my skin seemed to wake with every accidental touch. The tension, built up slowly over the hours, seemed to thicken the air, pulling us closer in ways I could feel but not quite name. At some point, her hand rested on the cushion so close to mine that the distance was almost laughable. My heart pounded as I let my hand drift just a little closer, as if pulled by a current stronger than my own will. Our fingers brushed, a feather-light touch that jolted through me, setting off sparks in places I thought had long gone quiet. It was a question, an invitation, a secret promise in a single silent caress. I did not retreat. I let my hand linger, let the moment stretch, breathing in the space that now felt electric with possibility. She responded in kind, her fingers brushing back, exploring the delicate line of my hand. The sensations were almost unbearable in their tenderness. My nerves on edge, my body swaying unconsciously toward hers, needing more, desperate for the contact to deepen. My breath caught in my throat as she leaned just a little closer, her hair brushing my cheek, the scent of her skin warm and intoxicating. The world contracted to a single point of touch, a shared warmth blooming between our palms and radiating through our bodies. I turned, slow and careful, my face now inches from hers. My eyes searched hers, hungry for permission, for understanding, for some sign that I wasn't the only one falling through this moment. Her gaze met mine, open and unguarded, and in that space, I found both acceptance and desire. It was as if the whole night had led to this breathless hush. I closed the distance, feeling the gentle pressure of her lips against mine, soft, hesitant, full of questions and trembling need. The kiss was light at first, a testing of boundaries, the tasting of forbidden sweetness, but it deepened quickly, dissolving the last thin threads of doubt that bound us to the lives we knew before. Our hands found each other in the shadows, moving with growing confidence, exploring the lines and hollows of each other's bodies. The blankets slipped from our shoulders, exposing bare skin to the cool air, heightening every sensation. My hands slid over the curve of her hip, up her back, memorizing the shape of her under my palms. Her fingers traced fire down my spine, her mouth finding my neck, my collarbone, the places where longing collected and waited. Clothes gave way under urgent, gentle fingers, the rustle of fabric falling away, the shiver of skin against skin. I surrendered to her touch, to the swell of hunger rising inside me, to the exquisite relief of finally allowing myself to want, to be wanted. Each movement was unhurried yet desperate, as if we were afraid the spell would break if we moved too quickly. My world filled with the heat of her mouth, the press of her body, the intoxicating mix of vulnerability and anticipation. In the lamplight, shadows danced along our skin, mapping new territory with every caress, every sigh, every unspoken plea. I had not known I could feel this alive. I let myself dissolve into sensation, into the ache and wonder of connection, grateful for every second that the night gave us. The film still waited, forgotten, while we learned each other in silence, translating longing into touch, uncertainty into breathless, trembling joy. The world outside the windows faded into obscurity, eclipsed by the weight and warmth of her body against mine. The room seemed suspended in a hush, a timeless cocoon where only touch and breath had meaning. I felt myself unraveling, piece by piece, all the careful composure of a lifetime dissolving beneath her hands. Every movement was slow, deliberate, our bodies entwined on the soft rug, lost in the dim glow of the lamp and the flickering light from the forgotten television. Her skin pressed to mine, velvet and heat, the rhythm of her heartbeat echoing in my chest, syncing with my own in a secret, pulsing code. I surrendered to the gentle insistence of her fingers, tracing the lines of my ribs, the curve of my waist, the hollow at the base of my throat. Her lips moved with reverence, tasting every new inch of skin, mapping the geography of my body with patient, unhurried devotion. The intensity of each sensation was magnified in the darkness. My senses stretched until even the smallest touch became an electric shock. A thumb brushing the inside of my wrist, the soft graze of teeth along my collarbone, the hush of hair trailing over my stomach. My breath grew erratic, shallow, every exhale a release, every inhale a gathering of more longing. I reached for her, needing her everywhere at once, desperate to feel her anchored to me, proof that this was real and not a beautiful fever dream. Our bodies pressed closer, arms tangled, thighs sliding against each other, a slow friction that built and built, both soothing and unbearable. There was no room left for thought or memory, only the raw immediacy of skin on skin, sweat pooling in the hollows between us, limbs trembling as the pleasure crested and broke, again and again, in quiet, shuddering waves. Time collapsed, lost in the cadence of kisses, the swell and ebb of movement, the sacred stillness that followed each climax. In those moments after, I drifted in a haze, half asleep, the world reduced to the comfort of her embrace, her breath warm against my cheek, her hand drawing idle circles on my back. I pressed my face to her shoulder, closed my eyes, and let myself float in the thick, sweet darkness of oblivion. No guilt, no questions, just the soft cradle of the night and the certainty of her body holding mine. I memorized her, the slope of her hip beneath my palm, the sound of her voice humming low in her throat, the curve of her back as she stretched and folded into me. I felt stripped bare in every sense, not just of clothing, but of everything that had weighed me down for years. In her arms, I was unguarded, a woman remade by tenderness, by hunger, by the quiet bravery of letting go. The air smelled of skin and warmth, a trace of wine, the faint sweetness of something new. Outside, the world continued on, unaware, the hour slipping away. But here we lingered in the shelter of each other. With every drowsy, lingering touch, every whispered sound in the dark, I sank deeper into the safety of her, dissolving the boundaries between who I had been and who I was, in this night, in her arms, unafraid of being seen, unafraid of forgetting everything except this moment and the echo of her heartbeat under my hand. The first traces of morning crept into the room with a fragile, silvery quiet that felt almost sacred. I lay awake long before the alarm, watching the gentle shift of shadows across the ceiling as the light slowly bled through the window blinds, dissolving the darkness inch by inch. Her body was draped alongside mine, warm and heavy, one arm curled around my waist, her breath a soft, steady rhythm against my bare shoulder. For a long time, I did not move. I wanted to hold on to the weight of her, to press every detail of this closeness into memory before the world outside reclaimed us. The sheets tangled around our legs still held the warmth of the night, and I listened to her breathing, counting the quiet seconds between each inhale and exhale, letting the steadiness calm the wild flutter in my chest. The room felt untouched by time, suspended in the hush that follows something too intense for words. I ran my fingers along her arm, tracing the lines of muscle and bone, learning her by heart in the pale half-light. My skin tingled with the memory of her touch, every place she had kissed and held now alive and thrumming, each ache and tenderness a map of where we had met most completely. I could still taste her lips on mine, could feel the ghost of her hands at my hips, the echo of her mouth in the hollow of my throat. Even as my mind tried to understand the fullness of what had happened, my body already knew. This was not a dream, not a fleeting fantasy. It was something real, imprinted now in the spaces between breaths and in the secret language of our joined skin. She stirred slightly, pulling me closer in her sleep, her legs sliding over mine. I pressed my cheek to the crown of her head and breathed her in, letting the simple animal comfort of her body sink into my bones. Outside the window, the world slowly awakened, the far-off rush of early cars, the faint chirp of birds, a dog barking down the street. Each sound felt muted, as if wrapped in gauze, but it was enough to remind me of everything waiting outside this room. A pang of fear flickered through me. What came next, what we would say or not say, how we would fit ourselves back into the shapes required by the day. I closed my eyes against the anxiety, willing myself to remain here a little longer, to stretch these fragile moments into something lasting. Eventually, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, pulling the sheet gently from beneath her arm. My feet touched the floor, and the chill startled me fully into wakefulness. I gathered my clothes from the scattered heap on the rug and pulled on her t-shirt instead of my own, letting it fall loose around my thighs, soft with her scent. Moving through the house felt strange, as if the ordinary rooms had shifted slightly, their outlines blurred by the intensity of the night. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle, set mugs on the counter, going through the motions with hands steadier than I felt. Every sound, the trickle of water, the click of the stove, the faint hum of the refrigerator, seemed to ring out in the quiet, too loud in the stillness that had followed our night together. When she appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled, her cheeks still flushed with sleep, my heart leapt. She wore nothing but the thin blanket from the bed, wrapped loosely around her body, her eyes meeting mine with an openness that felt both tender and impossibly vulnerable. We moved around each other in silence, preparing coffee, pouring milk, standing close but not touching. I handed her a mug, feeling her fingers brush mine, and the intimacy of that simple contact almost undid me. We stood together by the window, side by side, watching the morning unfold in streaks of gold and pale blue over the rooftops. For a long time, neither of us tried to fill the silence. It felt too full already, with longing, with gratitude, with the knowledge that nothing would ever be quite the same again. There was a gentle choreography to the way we moved through the rest of the morning, folding the blanket, straightening the pillows, putting away the empty wine glasses. Our glances lingered, sometimes sad, sometimes full of awe at what we had shared. Each moment felt impossibly fragile, like glass held too tightly in trembling hands, beautiful and precarious in its clarity. I wanted to freeze us here, to let this morning stretch on, to never have to open the door and watch her leave. Yet the day advanced, bringing with it the reminders of reality, the ordinary claims of routine and responsibility. I felt a heaviness settle in my chest, the ache of inevitability threading through every gesture. She began to gather her things, her phone from the nightstand, her sweater from the back of a chair, her shoes from near the door. I watched her move through my house, already becoming a memory, and I realized I was mourning her even before she was gone. The air between us shimmered with everything unspoken, all the words we might have said if only we believed this could last. I wanted to reach out, to hold her in place, to ask for more time, but I could not move, could only stand and memorize her silhouette against the light. She turned to me one last time, her eyes bright with feeling, and in that look I saw everything we could not say, love and sorrow and gratitude mingled with a tenderness that would echo long after the morning faded. After she left, the house felt unbearably silent. I wandered from room to room, retracing the path of her presence, touching the places where we had lain together, where our laughter had filled the space. I pressed my palm to the sheets, still warm from her body, closed my eyes, and let the memory wash over me in waves, sweet, sharp, unendurable. I did not cry. I simply breathed her in, holding the morning close, knowing that what we had was as fleeting and precious as the fragile hush of dawn. Even as the world outside regained its color and movement, I remained for a while in the delicate suspension of that hour, changed in ways I could not yet understand, holding her absence gently, as if it too were something holy. The moment of parting settled on the morning like a veil, so fine it was almost invisible, yet heavy enough to weigh down every gesture, every breath. I watched her as she quietly collected her things, the small rituals of departure performed with a kind of reverence that told me she too felt the gravity of what was ending. The zipper of her suitcase sounded too loud in the hush of the house. Her hands moved with slow certainty, folding her clothes, slipping a hairbrush into a side pocket, checking her phone for messages that would draw her back into the world beyond our fragile cocoon. I lingered in the hallway, pressed against the wall, as if physical distance could somehow slow the relentless passage of time. My skin still held the warmth of her embrace, and my mouth remembered the taste of her, bittersweet and impossibly tender. There was an aching clarity in the silence that grew between us. The house was full of her absence even before she closed the door. The rooms where we had existed together now felt too wide, each corner echoing with the laughter and whispers that had filled the night. I drifted from the bedroom to the kitchen, touching the mug she'd used, the blanket still rumpled on the couch, the indentation of her body on the pillow. Each object was a relic, charged with memory and loss, and I moved among them with a quiet, deliberate care, gathering up the fragments of what we'd shared as if they might shatter at any second. Every step I took seemed to retrace the boundary between what had been and what could never be again. As she stood by the door, ready to leave, there was a hesitation, a pause heavy with the things we would not say. I felt the urge to reach for her, to pull her close and press my face to her neck, to breathe in the scent of her one last time. But my body would not obey. I could see the conflict flickering in her eyes, the sorrow etched in the lines of her face. All the words crowded behind my teeth, desperate to be spoken, but they tangled with fear and the weight of inevitability. She opened the door, letting in a gust of cool air, the sounds of life returning, a car engine rumbling, a bird singing on the wire, the world insisting itself upon us. I watched her step onto the porch, sunlight catching in her hair, and in that instant I wanted to call her back, to ask her to stay, to believe in the possibility of an us beyond this fleeting night. But I remained silent. I let her walk away, each step pulling a thread from the tapestry of my heart. I stood in the doorway long after she was gone, watching the street empty itself of her presence, the echo of her footsteps fading into the wide, indifferent morning. The sky was bright and cloudless, the kind of blue that promised renewal, but I could only feel the ache of emptiness pressing against my chest. I closed the door gently, as if by moving quietly I could somehow soften the reality of loss. The house was unbearably still, every surface touched by her now cast in shadow, every window reflecting back the memory of her smile, the curve of her shoulder, the weight of her hand in mine. I wandered through the rest of the day in a haze, half invisible, half raw. I tried to lose myself in routine, laundry, tidying, answering messages, but nothing could mask the sense of something essential having slipped away. Every object she had touched became a portal, pulling me back to the night we had shared. I pressed my palm to the wall where she had leaned, traced the outline of her name on my lips, let the silence expand until it swallowed everything but the memory of her. There was no space left for regret, only the deep, bruised gratitude for having felt alive, for having allowed myself to open to the dangerous, beautiful ache of wanting. I replayed her laugh, her sighs, the way her eyes darkened when she looked at me, as if I were something precious. It was a litany of absence, each recollection both a balm and a wound. As evening approached, I sat by the window, watching the world turn slowly toward dusk. The colors faded from gold to gray, and the first stars appeared in the deepening sky. I thought about all the ways our story might have been different, if I had been braver, if she had asked to stay, if the world were kinder to hearts like ours. Yet, even as sorrow thickened inside me, there was also a fragile sense of peace. I had crossed a threshold I could not uncross. I had known the fullness of desire, the serenity of surrender, the shattering sweetness of being seen. The pain of her leaving was sharp and clean, but it was not empty. It was the echo of something true, a mark left on my soul that would not fade, even as the days turned ordinary again. I slipped into bed alone that night, the sheets cold without her body beside me. The darkness pressed close, but I welcomed it, letting it hold me as I grieved the loss of what could never last. I closed my eyes and let memory fill the spaces she had left behind, holding on to the shape of her against me, the rhythm of her breath, the way she had once whispered my name as if it were a secret. In the end, all that remained was the tenderness of what we had shared, and the knowledge that, for a little while, I had allowed myself to be changed by love. I drifted into sleep with the imprint of her touch lingering on my skin, knowing that, for all its sorrow, had also given me a piece of myself I never knew I had lost.